Hey Garth, how's it going today?
Great, Jason. How are you?
Good. Best part of my week, Garth. Back with
Yep.
you on the
Yep.
pod, talking about Beard's Book Club.
Beards
We've
Book
got we
Club.
got we got a doozy for our listeners today.
Oh
I
yeah.
think, but before we get into it, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever had a mentor who's given you bad advice?
I ever had a mentor who's given me bad advice? Um, no, I don't think I have.
For real?
Uh, for real. I don't know. I always take things so positively, but even when a mentor has told me something like your answer is wrong, I was expecting more from you on this. I was hurt, but then after a while, could have been a month, could have been a year, I was like, they had a point. Like they had a real point there to me. I think it's all how you interpret it and how you. It's such a like mentoring is such a self-reflective exercise too in a lot of ways. What about you, Jason? Have you ever had a mentor that gave you bad advice?
Well, when I was growing up, I really wanted to be an accountant because I was good at accounting in high school. And I had a mentor, a parent friend who said, Jace, why would you be a bean counter? There's so much more out there. And I remember thinking to myself, he's right. I shouldn't be a bean counter. I want to do something different. It took me years to figure out what I want to do. Eventually, I ended up in education. So things worked out really well. I found my purpose here. But I think that was bad advice. I think he gave me this literal response that turned me away from something that I thought I wanted to do. Now, in the end, you're right. The optimist to me says everything worked out just fine.
That's what I mean.
Um, but you know what? At the time, I think it wasn't a fulsome a fulsome assessment of what an accountant would do. And now knowing a little bit about what accountants do, I think I'd be good at that job, and I think I would have enjoyed it. Now
And
that be
I think too, the concept of mentoring has improved over time as well because, we now understand the things that we say have great import if someone views us as a mentor and
and
vice
that
versa.
and that's where we start this conversation today.
Heyo.
Yeah, and I can hardly wait for people to listen to this conversation with Drew Dudley. Garth, why don't you give them the 15-second summary of this interview?
Yeah, this is day one leadership. Drew has had an incredible life. A life of
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of joy, a lot of incredible things, but also a lot of hard things and challenging things. And he shares those with us on his podcast. He shares them in his book. So these lessons in leadership are very real. They're very realistic, and they're very practical too. So enjoy, listeners. You're in
Buckle
for a
up.
ride.
Buckle up. This is a good one. Here we go.
You're in for a
Lassoing leadership, sharp and true. Beard's Book Club got wisdom for you. Turn the pages, let the stories flow. Unpacking lessons as we grow.
Welcome back to Lassoing Leadership. I'm Jason Rogers. I'm joined by my co-host and fellow values nerd, Garth Nichols. Garth, over to you.
Hi, Jason. All right, today's an exciting day. We're into season 3, Beard's Book Club. We have yet another incredible author with us. We've
Incredible. So excited.
talked a little bit about him in the previous episode, but we're here with him live, and it's so exciting because before we hit record, it's like it's just we've been having so much fun with this guest. He is transformed how thousands of people, educators, executives, students, all of them, transformed how they think about leadership. We're joined today by Drew Dudley, author of This Is Day One, and it's a book that's not just insightful, practical, always practical, right, Drew? Always practical. It reframes leadership as a series of daily behaviors grounded in our values, and that every day is a new opportunity to be the leader that you aspire to be. It's amazing. We're
Now,
so happy to have him.
and if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably seen Drew's TED Talk on everyday leadership. If you haven't, you must. It's an absolute classic. But today, we're diving into the next level. How can everyone live out leadership starting now, starting today? Drew, welcome to the show. We're excited to have you here.
Oh my gosh, I'm so psyched to be on this show. As soon as I got the email, I'm like, lassoing leadership. Oh, they're making happen something I've been meaning to do forever, but with different shows. So I love it. I love it that looking on my screen as I record this to the listeners, there's a little note in the corner that says actual recording is higher quality. And I want to put that up on my screens when I give speeches, which is just like actual speech is better quality, and just assume. So I'm assuming the audio quality is better, not that my answers are actually going to be more insightful. Like
anything's possible with AI.
Yeah,
Drew.
it's true.
And I think we're going to talk about AI, so we can help you there too.
Listen to that voice, though. It's just it's resonant through the microphone. Drew, as we talked about earlier, you and I have known each other for a long time, and we got to know each other at a TED Talk, TEDx IB York, back. I don't even know when that was.
2010.
2010. Thank you. And then I had you into the school that I was at, and working with our student leaders, and that was just so incredible. So we've been following your work, and when I saw this book, I was like, not only did I grab it, but I was like, how might we get this guy on the podcast? So welcome. And actually, small world moment, you spoke at Rundle Academy.
Yeah.
Way back when too. So we got lots of connections.
That's really, like, I just found that to be amazing to pop on with both of you and realize that, we had weaved across our paths at different times, and it comes full circle. So, and honestly, like, the chance to work with students was such a rush as well. And what you invited me to do there I don't get to do very often. And no matter what path you go down, and no matter how amazing it is, you every time you make a choice, there are things that you walk away from. And I was talking to a group of teachers recently, and was talking about how one of my great mentors, and think about this to everyone out there, every mentor you've had has given you at least one piece of terrible advice. And it's really interesting to me to look back at these people who have really shaped my life and think, but remember that one thing they taught you, whether you took it or not. And one of my high school teachers I respected a ton and had a wonderful impact on my life. I told them I wanted to be a teacher, and they said, I think there's bigger things for you, which I know was intended as a compliment. But I realized, looking back, like, to take that kind of shot at the path you decided to take really kind of shook me. And so we never know how those little things that we say, I mean, that's what the book's really about. Little, I don't use the word, but simple, because simple doesn't mean little. How those simple things that we throw out there can really land with people. And I did a lollipop moment talk, because people might hear everyday leadership. They might not know, but if they hear lollipop moment, I've watched people who've watched me speak for 55 minutes. And then I start that story and they're like, oh, it's that guy. Yeah. So, but it's kind of cool. Like, I feel like Mark Henry, who in the WWE said he has like the Mark Henry spot, something that he did that outlives him. And in a world that's so big, not everyone gets that. And so I was really lucky to get to do that, and then do it again at TEDx IB York and have that kind of thing hit people. But the idea also is that the opposite can be true. Just a little flippant comment that he meant to be positive, I still carry with me 25 years later, and makes me wonder about a decision not made. So that's the whole idea of the book, like the unintended consequences of what we do. The book focuses on the positive ones, but really, I think we also need to focus on the negative ones, which is really, 15 years later, the movement that unfortunately has been labeled woke is very much doing the same thing, which is let's put a bigger focus on how what we do impacts other people. And I did it sort of the positive way, and now we're seeing it sort of on the other side is how do we stop the bad stuff?
No, and this idea of like, this is day one, it's such a powerful concept. And in it, you talk about a lot of your own personal history, your own personal relationships, which I really appreciate. You get really vulnerable throughout the book. There is this one great moment where you're on a train and you see this little girl dancing around, and you have this amazing conversation with her. But it's the idea that leadership isn't something that's reserved for certain people, or it's not something that you can hold back until you have a title or a certain role. It's just something that you do. And I love how you stress this point through your stories and anecdotes. And anecdotes of people who were kind of stuck but are now leading. And maybe it was you who unlocked it, or maybe it was just one of those, flippant moments or something you said just in passing because there's circumstances or whatever. But you are unlocking that you are already a leader, right? So tell us a little bit about the moment or insight that sparked this shift in your thinking and inspired you to write the book.
It's so interesting because I've looked a lot at is there a moment? Because there's a lot of things in your life where you can point to a before and after, whether or not it's the actual catalyst that caused something. But there are these moments in our lives where it is a before and after for you. And with the book, it's hard for me to remember because it really is a mixture of wanting to sort of move on in my speaking and teaching career, but I had all this stuff that I didn't get time to share on stage anymore. All these, really, it's about stories. But I think a couple of things, if I had to look back and say were major catalysts, but they happen in sequence. There's a really interesting concept called the adjacent possible, which I find fascinating, that says sometimes innovations and new things in the world can't happen until certain steps happen first, because the big idea is only possible when you get to the idea adjacent. And so, because it was looked back in the early parts of the world when scientific discoveries were spreading around, that they tended to develop organically at different parts of the world with no communication, but they kept doing it at the same time. So why all of a sudden is gunpowder within the same 100 years? Why all of a sudden is this particular engineering feat when they didn't talk to each other? It's because the adjacent possible happened. And for me, the death of a young man in university that was not, and I didn't tell this story in the book to a great extent. I think I've buried 23 of my friends. So when I talk about the death of someone, but basically he passed away. And he was the first person I knew who embodied the concept of cool. Like when you're late teens, early 20s, that's important. But he did it through making people feel safe when he walked in the room, that he acted like everyone he talked about was standing behind him, and that he had a C average. You know what I mean? He wasn't captain of anything. But I had gone into my life believing that that's what defined you, is your titles and your influence and really your potential. And like, your potential is the word that other people use to describe how much money they think you should make. And so I thought that if you had lots of potential, you had to prove it at every step. And he wasn't like that. But I watched how he impacted people in a much more positive way than I did, despite me being the one who got patted on the back as doing things the way you should as a student. And when his funeral had, over 1,000 people at it, and there's 2,000 people at our school, that to me made me ask, what legacy am I leaving behind? I was living my whole life for people I hadn't met yet. The ones who would read your resume and let you into grad school, give you the next job, marry you one day. These are all people I hadn't met yet. And a lot of us live our lives where a lot of the things we do are driven by people we haven't met yet when we're younger. And that was a big moment for me. And the other was when finally I had to go and deal with major things in my life. So dealing with bipolar 2 disorder and finally recognizing the damage it was doing. And then shortly thereafter, recognizing that my alcoholism was making it impossible to effectively deal with my bipolar because they're so intricately linked to each other. And when I started dealing with the alcohol abuse, what I realized was that day one concept. So to get back to your question, in many 12-step programs or recovery programs, one of the concepts that really is embedded is that this is incredibly hard to do, to fight an addiction. It's so hard to do that you almost have to break it down into a single battle, or otherwise you don't think you can ever win and you'll give up. So instead of saying, look, you're going to have 30 years left in your life, and you got to spend every day of that not drinking, a part of your life that you have actually changed things to make sure you have access to it. Like if you're addicted to something, your life becomes about having it easily accessible. And so one of the things that you realize is that you have to fight it as if it's only one day. So today you have to not have a drink, and then tomorrow you can go back to it. But today, prove that you can do it. And then you treat every day of your life as if it's the first day of your recovery. So that the key is you're not overwhelmed by what is still to come. And you can't rest on your laurels of how many days you've done it in the past. It is one non-negotiable thing to accomplish today. To quote the great the great Aaron Sorkin in one of his characters said, I have one primary goal between getting out of bed in the morning and getting back into bed in the morning, and that is to not have a drink. And if you break things down like that, you can find the strength to fight for one single day, to make one single choice. But I realized that was so effective. And if it can make you break from addiction, it can certainly create habits. Like if you can stop using heroin with this process, there's not much that this thing can't do. And that became like the big thing for me. So Jason passing away and me seeing legacy was in behaviors and how people act when your name is mentioned in a room you're not standing in. That is legacy. That started getting me to realize that my leadership won't be tied to my accomplishments. It will be tied to the long-term memories people have of their interactions with me. And then it was realizing that there was a way to consciously do that every day and evaluate yourself and to start, I guess this was it, if you're trying to lose a lot of weight, which I also use the same process for, if you're trying to quit drinking, every single day is a success, or every day that you're below your calorie count is a success. And all of a sudden, as hard as it is, also this feeling of accomplishment that I'd never had before on a daily basis was there. So that's what really shifted it, my friends. And I mentioned when we started this off that my answers get long. And so there's no single moment. But also, if you're listening, think of this. Like I got a Q&A once at a business school. And one of the professors actually said, what was the single most transformative moment in your career? And that's such an interesting question to, like, I often ask audiences, what's the single happiest moment of your life?
Yes.
And it blows my mind how few people have thought about that. And the right people come back and say, well, not the right people, but people come back and say, oh, it's hard to pick. But the single most transformative moment of my career. And I realized, man, I probably wasn't in the room for the most transformative moment in my career. Like that decision was made in a room I wasn't in, but my behaviors had been the thing that factored into that moment. And so many of the biggest decisions in your life are going to be made by other people in rooms you're not in. And that I think is really important to remember, not so that you suck up to people or change who you are, but that you become, look, I keep telling my students, don't come to school, don't try to develop to become the type of person who gets a good job. Try to become the type of person who is great at a job. That's the whole Ted Lasso thing. He takes one look at Roy Kent and says, there's power there. You know what I mean? And he recognizes something in them that nobody taught. There's a book, The Last Lecture, Randy Pausch, and he actually wrote an accompanying book to it. And I think it's in the book that he really drops a bunch of great insights in the book. And this is a small one, but he tells the story of one of his first bosses saying, you're absolutely brilliant. But this is MIT. I can find brilliant anywhere. I need someone who makes everyone around them more brilliant. And you're not doing that. And that to me, like that's what that whole the whole Lasso idea is. And I know we're tying it, like I don't have to tie it back to that, but it's just the ability to unlock in other people, but not telling them, like letting them unlock. One of my favorite things about that show is every time Roy just looks off to the side and drops an F-bomb as he realizes something. And that's that old teacher taught me that, is that so much of our life is coming to grips with the fact that we're dropping depth charges of insight. Not like it's not a bullet or a silver bullet, right? He told me when I went back and gave him my book, and I told him the last thing I did before giving it to the publisher is a trick he taught me in grade 10. And I wanted him to know that, and to hand over my book to my English teacher, who I admired so much. And at the time he was dying of pancreatic cancer. And he said, see, this is what it means to be an educator, is you have to come to grips with so much of your best work you will never see. But every now and then someone comes back and tells you that depth charge you dropped 25 years ago, it went off. And the idea that we can all go through life not looking for that immediate confirmation that it worked, but just behave in ways where you can always think, well, whatever depth charge I left, when it goes off, it's going to be net positive. Like it
Drew,
really will.
You've mentioned the word behavior a couple of times, and I love your answer to this question. well, the other thing that I love about your book too is that, and listeners, you can hear this book is very personal to Drew, right? He shares a lot, but also in a very like practical way, make it practical all the time. But another part of this is your interweaving of values, so your behaviors drive values, and behaviors should reflect your values. And you have a lot of amazing resources in this book. And I love your appendix to it because it's sample action driving questions. And I just want to read one because we've talked about empathy a lot. But, for our listeners, this book really helps you unpack who you want to be and how you want to be. So in the appendix, he talks about this action driving question of empathy. He defines empathy, a commitment to trying to understand and share the experiences and emotions of others. Here are the questions. How did I strive to better understand someone today? What did I do today to make someone else feel less alone? And how did I let someone know I cared, even if I couldn't fully understand? And so when you literally wake up on day one of your life, which is the day, right? You can ask yourself these types of questions. And it's these types of questions that might be the depth charge, as you said, or it might be the adjacent possible that unlocks, the leadership in everyone. So I just really, really appreciated about that book. I know Jason wants to get in here too.
You've been talking, Drew, I think a lot about impact. Like when I'm listening to you talking about impact we have that we see or we don't see, I'm going to ask a bit of a counter question. I'm looking for your advice on this one. So if you're a newish leader and you know that you've got this opportunity for depth charge or impact, but you are paralyzed by the fact that everything you say is now important or more important than it was before and may have, as you said earlier in our conversation, a negative impact on somebody. What advice would you give to somebody to not worry about the opportunity that there's going to be a negative advice on that or negative outcome on that depth charge, but instead, be bold in your leadership? And what advice would you give to somebody who's feeling a bit of that paralysis about, I got to be careful with every word because it's really important here?
What a good question. And I think that it's important to think that every word I say is important, but to also, I think this is the thing. We are innately DNA encoded to look at the negative potential outcome because that keeps us alive. Yeah. And one of the biggest insights I was ever given about leadership and the way our mind works is that the last major hardware upgrade to our brains was 40,000 years ago. And for most of human history, the primary threats to our well-being were physical. We would starve to death, we would freeze to death, we would be attacked and killed. But now the primary threats to those of us fortunate enough to live in the developed world are mostly social and emotional. The problem is we still have a brain that's hardwired to deal with physical threats, and they deal with social and emotional threats the way they do physical, which is maladapted. It really is. And we're the only creatures with a gap between stimulus and response. And really, our lives and our leadership are determined by how we use the gift of that gap, right? And that's where you can go from how you react to something to how you respond, because that's the difference that humans have, is that you can understand your reaction and pause for a second and then choose a response. So for me, it's very important to be aware that what we do is we always think, what could be the bad? What could be the bad? And one of the questions I ask, or two questions that I will ask when you're sitting there and someone expects a response from you, three things. And I'm going to forget the last one, probably. The first thing you should ask is, does this person expect or need a response from me? And in some cases, just pause before you give every one of them. The second one is, how can I be useful here? And the third question really informs the second. So what are they afraid of? And when you're listening to someone, don't try to form your response and don't try to give advice. Ask yourself, they're telling me this because they need something from me. How can I be useful? And one of the best ways you can be useful to people is to ask yourself, how can I make them less afraid? Right. And that's what I learned from my friend back in university, Jason, is that when you make people less afraid, you are leading them. And the big difference between leadership in this world and toxic leadership is how people use fear. And if you're using fear to try to succeed, if you're trying to remove fear, that's leadership. If you're using fear to try to win, which it's very good at, really,
Yep.
really good at,
We see it. We see it.
that's politics. And not every politician runs for office. And, many of them are using fear to get what they want. And so for those people who are like, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to do damage. If you ask, does this person need a response? What are they afraid of? And how can I be useful? You're very rarely going to hurt someone. And I think that's the key. And this is the big one, take the time to think about whether or not this could have a negative impact. And I tell you, you're 90% of the way there. If that becomes instinct for you to say, okay, how is this going to impact people? And I really learned that because my brain worked really fast, especially when I was hypomanic. And that meant that I could get straight through to an answer, an idea faster than most people. And I always thought of that as a gift. And in many ways it is, right? You don't have to meander through thoughts and ideas. It's just boom, there it is.
Yeah.
But when I developed these ADHD symptoms I currently fighting with after my last bout of COVID, I've realized that I'm not smart. I'm not dumber. Sorry. I'm just slower. I'm slower, but I think I'm smarter because now to get to every idea, I have to wade through the nuance in a way I never had to before. And I finally asked that question. And realized it's not intention, it's impact. And so when your intention is to be useful, to make someone less afraid, and to actually ask what do they need, empathy is underpinning all of those. And it gives you the chance to ask those questions. Before I forget, because of the ADHD, you said something a little earlier about the questions. And I just want to point out to people, the book is about creating questions, not so much that you ask them in the morning, is you're going to be asked them at the end of the day. So the idea is if every night before you go to bed, you had to prove you deserve tomorrow, the way you do it is by passing a test of, let's say, 5 questions. I give 6 in the book. But then you try to get 3 out of 5 every day. But you'll notice those questions, if you ask them in the morning, it will say, what did I do today to move someone else closer to a goal? For instance, that's for empowerment. And it's based on this research that says unanswered questions cause tremendous psychic discomfort for the brain, and that unfinished tasks will drive your unconscious to behave in different ways to finish them. So an unanswered question drives behavior, right? Because that's what the book's about, is behavior. And the idea is those questions have to be designed so you go, okay, at the end of the day, I'm going to have to answer this. And then your brain goes, oh, okay, that's an unfinished task for today. And in all those moments where maybe you would have ignored that opportunity before, now when you see it, your brain goes, oh, thank God, here's the chance to feel like less stressed about that unanswered question. So before I forgot that, I know I threw that into a different answer, but.
No, it's good because it's actually in the book you talk about, and I forget what course it was, Drew, but you were talking about the students that you were working with. And when you came up with this, I mean, it was almost like an experiment in leadership, wasn't it?
100% experiment. Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about how that worked, because your big discovery was making them come up to you at the end of, I forget if it was a week or a day. And you had an experience with one of your students who really unlocked this notion of asking questions at the end of the day and that sort of psychic dissonance. Talk to us a little bit about that whole experiment with that class.
Oh, yeah. It started when one of my students, who was smarter than me, because your job in university is to graduate all these people half your age and twice as smart as you before they figure out that that's actually the case. And one of them, truly great guy, came in and threw himself on the couch. I don't know if this is the story you're talking about, and he said, it's a lot easier to stand up for an ideal than it is to live up to one. And I was like, dang, like I think it was Allie Stevenson that said it, but like really kind of blew my mind that he said that, and got me thinking about the gap between who we want to be and how we're behaving and how we feel about that gap, and how our frustration at the gap actually leads us to not bother closing it every day. Like I'm the way I was, I'm a drunk. What's the point? And that when he said it's a lot easier to stand up for an ideal than to live up to one. And what would happen is I asked them at the end of every day to try to go out and have impact. And we defined impact as creating moments that cause people to feel like they're better off for having interacted with you. And they'd come to my office and they'd always think of one, but they were thinking of one at that moment. So they were looking back and using their values to reflect on behavior that had happened. And we needed something that drove our behavior. So your values have to drive your behavior, because a big part of the book is about the idea that a value is only a value if you use it as criteria for decision making. And so if we weren't thinking about impact till the end of the day, it wasn't impacting decision making along the way. And so the book is talking about not only how you can identify and define your values and use these questions to embody them actually every day to do the behaviors, but it really is about creating a professional and personal tool, which is criteria for decision making. Because if you haven't been identifying and defining your values, then you haven't had clear decision making criteria your whole life. And one thing that really shook me is when I asked myself, okay, what criteria have you been using? What criteria have you been using to make decisions your whole life? Like, honestly, Drew. And I realized it wasn't based on values. It was based on this principle that I understand, and we have to forgive ourselves for, because life is complicated. But the criteria we often would use is which option will avoid the most consequences right now. And avoiding consequences and living values is very hard to do. And, I'm working on trying to develop a decision-making model and a leadership model. The show The Good Place, where it talks about moral philosophy, but I don't want to give it away. But an overall theme is that the world that exists now is not the one that was created by or that existed when moral philosophers to make decisions were there. So one of the things I try to tell leaders, and a lot of people are pushing back on this, it's probably my first unpopular, in some cases, leadership approach, is that I think we should adopt a decision-making philosophy that's based on the idea of being net positive at the end. I think what happens is a lot of, even my book, it's always about what the best leader would do, right? And one thing I like about Ted Lasso is he's a deeply flawed man. And that's so good that they showed the two sides, like the struggle internally. Roy Kent is such an extraordinary character because he's the perfect male woke character in many ways, because he takes accountability. He recognizes when he makes mistakes. He takes accountability for it. He changes his behavior. He apologizes to the people that he's hurt. He's just a gruff jerk when he does it. But what they've done is hidden a man so dedicated and open to being better that's such a great example of it. And that, to me, I think, is one of the key ideas, is that we can really break down what we do every day into creating moments we're proud of. And then we can reflect on them at the end of the day. Because right now, too many of us fall asleep every night not being able to identify something about ourselves that we feel good about. And so the idea of the day one process is that you create these values, and then you have questions that drive them. And then at the end of the day, before you fall asleep, when you close your eyes, because that's the crappiest part of adult life, between closing your eyes to fall asleep and actually falling asleep. We're so mean to ourselves there. Well, it's why I think a lot of us fall asleep looking at our phone or a tablet or the TV, because you pass out, you don't have that reflective time. But what this allows you to do is, it says, the book is basically trying to identify a realistic thing about the world. And I lost what I was saying about decision making.
No,
is that
I think, Drew, and I think you're getting at, and we've heard this before on this podcast, sorry to interrupt, but it's this idea of how do you interrupt this automaticity? That's a word that's come up with some other books that we've had. How do you interrupt? And your comment is just like, values drive the behavior. Use it as a criteria for decision making, and then just be net positive at the end of the day.
Yeah,
Like, simple, practical stuff. Hard to do, though.
Yeah, not just the end of the day, man. Like your whole life, because even like my book, I look at it and I'm like, oh, this is tips on what the perfect leader would do, and it doesn't acknowledge the fact, because it basically says use your values to make decisions. But what I didn't address well enough in the book was, well, sometimes the decisions that are options will violate one or more of your values, and you actually have to choose which ones to violate. And I've realized that I want to give people permission to do that. My goal with the book is to say, be aware of the values and how they influence your decision. And also, you've got to forgive yourself, because real life decisions means you got to violate them. If you violate them after thinking and being aware that's what you're doing, that's still leadership. And my sort of decision-making model now is that people do crappy things. Every person's going to do crappy things. What I think happens in this world is people do crappier things than they actually have to get out of the situation that has made them do the crappy thing. They overshoot. And that's what gets us in problems. So I'm like, if we can acknowledge we're going to make mistakes, that we're going to have to bend rules, that we're going to not do what the perfect leader would do. If we acknowledge that's okay, but that in the long, like that we have to always be net positive at the end. So net positive means you're a good person, and you don't have to be a great person. Just make decisions that at the end you go, I can still be net positive. That to me is something you should be proud of. And the leadership test tried to say, the book tried to say, you're not always going to be in charge of what you have to do every day. You're always in charge of who you are. And at least have knowledge of that. And here's how, so that you can make better informed decisions about what you're giving up, who you're trying to be in those moments. So you don't feel lost. Even if you say, look, this is more about integrity than loyalty, or friendship or loyalty than integrity, at least you know that. And you've made that decision. And that is power.
This is all so rich, Drew. And I find myself, like, I need to re-listen to this. I almost feel like I need to slow this down and re-listen to it and bring all of this to the surface. You've hit on so many important topics, which are resonating deeply with me. Just so you know, from a leadership lens, there's a lot of truth in here when it comes to, understanding your values, making decisions around your values, but also understanding the incremental success that you're talking about day in and day out that develops positive habits and creates a better outcome in the end. And you also offered a really, really clean segue to us a couple of minutes ago, because we wrap up every podcast by saying to our guests in this season, was Ted Lasso a good leader? And so you've talked about my favorite character, Roy Kent. Garth smiled there because every episode I talk about Roy. He's my absolute favorite. But we're coming back to Ted in this one. And I know you're a watcher of the show and you're a fan of TV, Drew. So we want your unvarnished truth right now. Is Ted Lasso a good leader?
Sometimes. He doesn't lead himself all that well sometimes, but he catches himself. And I've always kind of thought, what if we reframed leadership as it's not something you earn and then you have it as a title? He's a good leader. He's not. What if leadership only existed when positive impact was being, or positive behaviors were occurring? So the idea isn't to try to be in your life a great leader. It's to be a great leader as often as possible. And so when you stop engaging in leadership behaviors, you're not a leader anymore. And that's okay. You can sleep, you can relax, you can be a dick, for that period of time. As long as you recognize what your behaviors did, do your best to make sure it's net positive. But honestly, let's stop beating ourselves up and treating leadership like it's a title that you earn, like in the military, and then you can't lose. Ted Lasso is sometimes a great leader, and sometimes he's not. What I'll tell you is that watching Ted Lasso be both a good and a bad leader makes you a better leader. And I think that only seeing the good parts of a person's leadership makes them an admirable, but not necessarily someone you learn from. Because if you don't realize what went into those right and inspirational decisions, you just think the person is always doing it right. And I think that makes them seem like bigger than us. Watching Ted Lasso makes you a better leader, because Ted Lasso is sometimes a good leader, and that's okay. And you take the good things that he does, and they are many, but you also see the flaws, and then hopefully you can see that in you. But Ted Lasso doesn't know that. Watching his story makes you a better leader. And ultimately, I think that's what the writers cared about.
Drew, this has been an absolute gift.
Wow.
And I kept it to 10 minutes too long.
This is your book. This is day one, is like, it's required reading, I think, for anyone who wants to build culture, who wants to understand how they can impact others, and most importantly, live their leadership out loud. I just want to, so I take notes every podcast.
I love it because I got,
and it's like, your friend Jason, who you talk about, I think this is a really significant point because it wasn't for you. It was an awakening. It was one of these adjacent possibilities. It wasn't his grades, wasn't his resume, wasn't his potential, but you saw how he impacted people, and that for, our listeners who work with young kids all the time, I think that's a huge lesson for us. How do we awaken our students on their journey to the next to actually be open and be observant for these types of people and learn from them too. Also, notion about values, I was just going to say, like, notion about values, but also those 3 questions in response to Jason, and your answer was, how can I make people less afraid? And that goes to like psychological safety. We were talking earlier in this season about to Danny Bauer and Glenn Robbins. We talked about the space between stimulus and response, and those 3 questions allow leaders to hold that space a little bit so they don't react, but they can actually have a really meaningful response. And now we can layer on top of that, what is this person afraid of? Where's the harm? How can I make this person less afraid? So thank you for gifting us with those insights. It's amazing.
Amazing. To the listeners, you nailed it. Nothing brings a group together more than having a common thing that makes them feel safe. And if you can be that thing, that's how cultures get built. And just listening to you there made me realize that that's what's brought me closest with most of the groups I've been with, when you go through hard times, but also we all had a common thing that made us feel safe. And if it's a person, and if you could be that person, that's all you need to do to build culture, is to be the source of safety to the group, and they will come together over that. And sorry, I know we were wrapping up, but I wanted to get that on tape because I'll forget it as soon as this thing turns off.
Drew, that is absolute pure gold. And I'm left with wondering not about day one, but wondering if this is just recording one. I feel like we have just scratched the surface. I feel like we've got many topics to cover coming out of this. And I'd love to see you back on the show at some point. But for now, we're going to wrap up this week's episode, Drew. And I would love it if you would be willing to take us home with our tagline.
Oh, my friends, keep leading the Lasso way.
You did it, Drew. That's amazing. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, Drew.
What a
Thanks
great
so much.
show.
Thanks, Jason.
Absolute
Thanks,
pleasure,
everybody.
everyone. Peace.
Okay.
Grab your coffee, grab your seat. It's time to learn, it's time to meet. Garth and Jason setting the tone. Leadership lessons to take back home. Lassoing leadership, sharp and true. Beard's Book Club got wisdom for you. Turn the pages, let the stories flow. Unpacking lessons as we grow. Keep leading the Lasso way. Together we'll grow stronger every day. So plug in your headphones and let's start